Forex versus crypto, which market has been better this week? Well, if we start with Forex and if we start with EURUSD, we had this Monday pump, and if I'm not mistaken, I was actually talking about that I would like to literally see the very opposite price action. I was hoping that we will basically we still respecting this wick, but my initial thought was I would like to basically see a run on the lows, right? Because the volume or the body candle looks really nice. It can happen in the following weeks. I'm not gonna be having any kind of hopium. We'll just trade the pure price action. But like overall, basically going from here to the level kind of made sense. But that means that we would need that basically continuation to the upside. I said also, if I'm not mistaken, that it would violate my idea if we literally pump, which that was literally what we did on a Monday. So now I want to talk about just some traits that basically make sense, at least like to my type of trading style. And if I am basically honest, there's not been too many. I would say 2 or 3 trades like top. I would mostly say 2 trades out of this entire week, especially if we going just for the 4-hour time frame. And even if I hide the it's not showing hiding the indicators, but okay. So as you can see, we basically stay a pretty sustainable amount in this range. So you can basically see a lot of body open and close candles basically within this region, within this level. So that itself is telling me there's not gonna be that many higher time frame trades that kind of make sense. But also, if I am looking at basically my zones, maybe let me hide this. It kind of confused me now. I don't need to see it. So basically on the Monday, we hit this like full extension, and based on my experience, we rarely doing it. Sometimes we like overshoot it, but most of the time, and by most of the time, I mean, I would need to check out my stats, but roughly, let's say 80% of the time, we not gonna breach this level. And what it also means is it could be some really decent mean reversion trade. So obviously, if you are not familiar with the zones and stuff, it probably gonna be a little bit more difficult to catch a trade, basically right here. But what I like to do usually is basically trading basically from this level to this level, because based on my testing on a EURUSD, it usually having 80 to 90% probability. So also depending how my stop loss and size is going to be, but usually most of the time this is a winning trade. But because this was basically prior to Frankfurt, then I obviously missed this trade. So like, what is the ideal setup? And basically, since I'm seeing this wick right here, I'm gonna treat it as my invalidation for basically short. And because we having such a huge pump and basically grinding to the downside, then we had this wick, and now we continue to the downside. I'm basically waiting for the London Open, which this candle is the London Open. And what is the context here? So I'm basically having some overextension. So this is a pretty much one good one good confluence to have. The second is basically this particular wick, which looking pretty decent. The second is we having a huge ass wick, or not wick, body candle, right? And because we have this body candle, there is a huge imbalance in the market. So this could or should technically, in theory, most of the times acting as some type of magnet. Also at the same time, there is, you can call it a gap, whatever you want to call it. Basically this level that we either at open basically a little bit higher than the previous day or the previous week. So likely this gonna be some type of magnet that you can basically trade towards to, and because of it, this trade make the most sense based on all the probabilities. So basically going for either this because it's basically my zones, or basically just covering this huge wick. So it's not fancy setup, I would say, but maybe you can backtest it and see how many times, if all these criteria has been presented, would give you a winning trade. I would say most of the time it would give you, and by most of the time I would say, if I have to guess, like 65% minimum, if all these confluence side by side with my zones, would give you this particular winning trade. Then obviously there has been some fall through, but it's been a little bit late, and I was actually a little bit bullish biased because of this particular V-shape. So since we're having this V-shape, I was kind of hoping that this is gonna be some sort of range, and then we're gonna continue to the upside. Basically, not at the same day, because based on my experience, this thing, if we overshoot, coming back all the way down to basically recover the entire push, well, like prior, not even prior to the New York, like 3-4 hours in a New York session and then shooting to the upside, well, that would require a lot of momentum and a lot of purchasing power. So from my experience, it's less likely. But I was basically hoping that on a Tuesday we might gonna get it. But on the Tuesday we technically get it in a way, but they were basically just range setup. So only if I would be solely trading of my zones, which basically this setup right here, if I actually pull up the probability setups, so lower SR, so we got roughly 68% ish probability that we will go basically to this level. And if I am seeing that we basically struggle here with multiple wicks to the downside, I would basically taking some trades towards the upside. But there would be more like a riskier setup. I would say on the Wednesday, Wednesday has been a little bit, also a little bit tricky, because technically there were one setup on the London Open, which was basically this candle and continuation to the downside. But because we having a huge consolidation and I'm not seeing any really strong rejection, and by rejection I am talking about some really nice wick to the upside that would kind of basically some type of candle that we had on a Monday, we basically didn't have it. So I was pretty much hesitant to take anything on a higher time frame. Basically later on the Thursday, the only setup I was considering was the long from my level right here. The reason behind it is because we tap into this imbalance right here. So this is a really nice magnet to have. So if you're seeing some type of rejection after having some push to the upside, like we having here, then we also having the imbalance and there is a nice reaction, that's usually a good, let's say, high probability setup to my taste, at least to give me some decent reward. Not every single time, like we seeing in this case, we shoot and breaking the structure to the upside, that would be literally the perfect setup, right? Continuation to the upside. But either way, if I am just focusing on the setup right here, this would be definitely some 1.5 risk reward ratio, depending if I use my ATR value or basically the wick, things like that. And I also like that we having this rejection basically prior to New York. Also we having this imbalance right here, so this is also another confluence that If this is a strong bullish trend, well, we should likely go at least this 10 pips to the upside. So then I could eventually manage some trade. But overall, if you're just looking at the entire price action this week, maybe I can show the weekly chart, because like on a weekly, so I have my weekly levels. Just for the context, usually you're seeing that some weeks we basically trading from one level to another, but basically this week we were touching the upper zone basically all week long. I would consider also longing of this volume candle right here, because we having basically some consolidation, we having some wicks to the upside, and then we start pushing. And this is usually really good price action that I like to trade if the candles gonna be a little bit different. If this green candle would be basically about this red one, the bearish one, I would more than happy to take a long basically right here. So if we would have, let's say, slightly closing above here, I would be happy to basically take a long. But because we didn't have it, and then we need to wait another basically 1 hour to push price higher, well, now we're talking about 27 pips to, I don't know how far we're gonna go. This is barely 1-to-1 risk reward ratio. So depending on the size, this would be actually a quite a bit decent Wyckoff setup. But like overall, going from the accumulation back to the accumulation and then like coming to the upside, well, it's a little bit shitty. But just coming from my intraday perspective, so I was basically talking about the Wednesday that was actually a pretty decent setup, especially we tap into average daily levels. So there's basically this setup right here. So if we just having a look, this was actually a pretty decent example on a 15-minute time frame that we basically having, I'm gonna use just a drawing tool. So we having this really beautiful wick to the upside. We breaking basically this bullish candle with some volume to the downside. So this is basically my short signal and targeting either my SR zone or basically these volume candles. So I'm gonna be conservative and just call it a 1.5, but also another signal right here could add up. This was basically probably one of the cleanest setup right here. And if we're moving to the very next day, we actually got the Frankfurt Open, Frankfurt setup, I would say. So the Frankfurt setup is usually going for some liquidity prior to the London Open, and basically London will either continue or basically reverse. So this was pretty much also really clean setup, because we had this sweep, but we also having this push, beautiful volume to the downside. We had consolidation, and after the consolidation we got 3 consecutive strong impulses to the downside. So this was also kind of no-brainer. And as you can see, we also keep respecting a lot of times basically these gray zones, which usually act either as a support resistance or basically, I mean, you can think of it as a support and resistance in a way, because as soon as we break it, it kind of becomes the resistance. Obviously not every single signal I'm gonna be taking, because I need some type of context. After seeing actually this reaction to the upside, well, based on the hourly, right, if I'm not mistaken, it's basically this week. So on the hourly, it was also really beautiful setup to the upside. But also because this is intraday setup, I am basically focusing on having some type of setup that I could target, let's say this, and I need to having a much tighter stop loss when it comes to the intraday levels. But because this is prior to New York Open, I'm gonna be trading, or that's what I usually do, just waiting for the New York Open to showing me some signals, unless I'm having like super clean setup, which this is not the case. And obviously, as we basically opening the New York, then we shoots up to the downside, and eventually on another level we having this signal. But these signals, because I'm using the time filter, this is usually the signals that I am looking for whenever I'm basically trading, because as you can see, I get way more signals, but I'm trying to filter it just solely on the London and the New York price action. Now going to the BTC, I would say the Bitcoin is basically the winner for today's week, because even though the Monday has been also very similar, we having a really sharp drop. If I see such a sharp drop and then just slowly pushing price to the upside, I'm basically skipping a day. Like there is no point for me to even like watching the chart. But the very next day has been actually really interesting. So on the London, we start to having this pin bar on basically average daily low. We also break this push to the downside, basically this sharp move. But now it seems like we not having the follow through to the downside. What we have instead is bunch of wicks, and basically the time is also really important. So basically this is the London, sorry, not London, this is the New York candle close. So based on this close, what we're seeing here, so we got really important level, we got the London that basically creates some pin bar, but also the New York, or the prior to the New York, we also create another basically sweep right here with I would say a strong candle. So that's basically the long setup that I consider myself as a basically A+ setup. This is my type of bread and butter reversal, basically seeing some beautiful wicks with basically follow through, some bullish candle, and this is basically my conservative taking profit, because that's the closest level that would make sense for the reversal to take in place. The second level would be obviously this one, third one, and so on. And if we just following the price action, we also having another beautiful push to the downside. We recover roughly 50% of the candle or of this entire push. There's also some support level, basically my SR zone, which we bounce really nicely from and then continue to the upside. So another, I would say, beautiful basically continuation setup. And eventually, as we overshoot, this is really important insight for me specifically, because we having a huge wick that we take the previous highs, and then we basically continue to the downside. So after we having this consolidation and pushing price higher, basically on a Friday, we got some continuation. So we got the wick, we got basically coming back to this range, and this candle is really important for me. So we, first of all, we respected this wick right here, and the second of all, we had a really strong bearish candle closure. So these confluences are pretty much really good enough for me, and I'm obviously expecting some continuation to the downside, so this low is very likely to be taken out. Adjusting the taking profits and levels, I would say this is 1.5 risk reward ratio. Obviously I could extend a little bit more for 2R, but these two trades has been, I would say, to my taste, the most basically cleanest one. If we also looking at the if we look at the weekly levels, so this was basically the EURUSD, right? So the gold, not the gold, BTC. BTC has been actually really beautiful, as you can see. So we basically having 3 levels, and we bounce really nicely of these 3. So seeing such a nice confluence on the daily levels and also on the weekly, this was actually basically perfectly aligned. So overall, I would consider BTC to be a pretty much a winner for this week, because just these 2 trades alone, which was really easy to spot, would net you at least 4R on a weekly, or 4% if you will, which is basically pretty enough what you need to make some nice profits. See you next time.